Check. There we go. Crazy. All right, I don't know. My cats must have walked on the soundboard. Hopefully I'm not blowing you guys out. Let me know if the sound's okay. Let's see, we got a comment here. There's a little, hey GP, can you hear me this morning? Hopefully we've got good sound and I'm not blowing your eardrums out. I hear you. All right, we got it fixed. I've got a little button on my soundboard that says Phantom Power. Apparently, if you don't have phantom power, you cannot make this happen. I don't even know what that is. I just know it's something I'm supposed to have turned on. Hang on, I'm trying to fix everything here. Somehow it got all on set. I don't know what's going on. All right, we're good. It's just not a Wednesday morning without a few tech issues. It really isn't. It feels like my camera's super high. I don't know what's going on over here. I'm not cool enough for phantom power. Apparently, I'm not either. I think probably when the cats jump up here, they walk across the soundboard. Don's under this misimpression that you can keep cats off things. And I'm like, yeah, when you're home and you're watching them constantly, you can keep them off things. But as soon as you leave, they're on all the things. He's so silly. He likes to live in that little fantasy world. And I occasionally just pop that bubble. So that he learns that that's those things that he thinks they're not really real things. It's just the fantasy world that Mr. Whitbroat lives in. And it's a rich fantasy world at that. We had a great show on Chicks on the Right this morning. If you guys don't watch the ladies, foil, well, yeah, I mean, but you'd have to put it all. They're not bad about getting on the kitchen counters. Now, Steve will jump up to get on top of the refrigerator. But they're bad about getting on his speakers. He bought these speakers in college. And I'm telling you, if this house catches fire, he's going to get the speakers out before he gets me out. I swear it. He loves those speakers. And I guess they've worked this long, so they're good speakers. But they're big. They're tall. They're like, so just think back of chair height plus 5 inches. So they're these tall. I don't know if you can see them. No, you can see the chair. So like right to the, I don't know which way you guys are seeing it. You see the little buffet over there that I'm working on. The other side, there's like a little piece sticking up next to where the cat's butt is. That's a speaker. So he's got one of those on. He's like all into like home theater, home audio. Like he's got, God love him. He's got his seat on the couch perfectly mapped to where you get the ultimate sound by sitting in his seat. So he's got speakers behind us and to the sides, and then to the sides in the front, up high, to the sides in the front, down low, and then the center channel. And it was so funny because he said to me the other day, he said, there was something weird about the sound on the TV. And he said, you've been messing with the settings again. And I just cracked up. I'm like, I can barely operate the remote. You think I'm messing with settings? You're kidding me, right? He's like, no, you've messed with the settings before. I said, that literally has never happened. Like if sometimes like weird stuff will happen after we have an electrical storm. Steve, find a spot, man. After we've had an electrical storm or something, there will be like the sound won't work on the TV. I have to call him at work. I'm like, hey, the sound's not working. And then he walks me through the 7 remotes so that I can fix it. It's like the 7 circles of hell, but just with remote controls. I have no, like you have to know like which channel you're going to watch. Not like TV channel. I could figure that out. It's like, it does sound like phantom power. Mr. Whit, yes, this is his soundboard. That explains it perfectly. But like he'll, like every component. So he's got a VCR. We've been together 14 years. I've never watched a VCR tape in this house, but we can't get rid of that. And then he's got like a double deck cassette recorder. Then he's got a turntable. Then he's got that one thingy that everything goes into. I don't know what that's called. And then there's the thingy below that you have to set the sound on. And then there's the preamp below that. I do know what that's called. And then to the left, there's the other thingy you have to turn on. And above that is the Blu-ray player. And above that is the video game thing that we never play. And I'm just like, can we just like have a Blu-ray player and then the top thingy that I don't know what it's called, and then the thing under that for the sound that I don't know what it's called, and the preamp, and then the thing to the left. I think that would be plenty. I think we can lose the double cassette player. He would launch into an epic lecture if I said that out loud. I know better. And like, do we really need the VCR? I just need to send all the VCR tapes off and have everything put on DVD. But like the old Disney movies and stuff, we've got them on DVD. Receiver, amplifier, preamp. Thank you, Debbie. I don't know if Debbie's also a AV geek. I think she is. So that's probably how she knows. I don't know. I'm like, we have these. So I said, when can we get rid of the VCR Disney movies? And he said, well, when they all come out on DVD. Well, I think all but like maybe one or two have come out on DVD and we have them. And so I think what I'm going to do, if you tell, I will hunt you down. I think what I'm going to do is just slowly, like one at a time, like once a quarter, just because I don't even think he knows what he has at this point. Of course, as soon as I get rid of it, it'll log in his brain. He's probably got some sort of, Debbie understands my pain here. It's so hot in here. He's probably got some sort of mental inventory that he will suddenly know, or they're like the universe will shift or something, and he will know I have gotten rid, because it's happened in the past. There's been a thing, and I'm like, I've lived here for 10 years. We've never used this thing. And so I'll get rid of it. And then suddenly, I don't know how it happens, but he's like, do you know where my thing that I never used and haven't used in 10 years is? And I'm like, shit. Does he know? Is he watching me? Like, how did he figure that out? Debbie says, my previous hubby of 40 years. Oh my gosh, I'm hot. I'm going to have to get a fan. Maybe I'll just turn that one up. Was a stereophile and worked at Fine Audio Studios. I'm not a techie yet. Me neither. So yeah, there's that. But at least the sound's working, right? And I wouldn't have this soundboard if it were not for Mr. Whitbroat. And I needed it because I needed a mic, because the computer mic that you have is just horrible. Hang on, I'm going to turn this fan up. Good Lord. Make it a little higher. Okay, I'm back. There we go. Anyway, so we didn't have a show Friday. I was going to give you guys a little update on that. So I went to the electrophysiologist to have the follow-up on the 30-day monitor that I did. So what I have is this thing called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, and it is a congenital heart defect that generally doesn't cause people much trouble, but because it's me, it will. And I've had a couple instances in my life of atrial fibrillation. Well, if you have Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome and you also have afibrillation, or have a predisposition to go into it, if you get into a high heart rate, like you're riding your bike or something, and this happened to me recently. I was riding the bike and I got super dizzy and almost passed out, and I had to stop and sit in the grass on the side of the road, and I was by myself, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I just was really, really dizzy, and I had to lay there for like 15 minutes in the grass, and people were driving by like nobody stopped or anything. I think they just thought I was resting. And so my cardiologist had found this, my regular cardiologist had found this pre-excitation pattern, which is how they figured out I had WPW. So he sent me to the electrophysiologist, and I've had like 3 instances of AFib. So he put me on a cardiac monitor, and he can't quite see where the signal is coming from, which means it's probably very close to the AV node. So your AV node sets the main number of beats per minute for your heart. And then you've got smaller nodes that are like backup nodes. Well, what I have is an extra node, or maybe more than one. And we know one is really close to the AV node, and they're going to go in and freeze it. Usually they burn it, but this one's really close to the AV node. So they're going to freeze it because they can reverse that. But when you freeze really close to the AV node, what you can do is damage the AV node, and then you're totally dependent on a pacemaker. So I have a pacemaker anyway, but I'm only 18% dependent on it now. So if that AV node gets damaged, I would be 100% dependent on it. So while I was at the electrophysiologist, he said, well, let's see if we can find it here. So he used a machine that they use to interrogate my pacemaker to see what I've been doing over the last, since they checked it last, and jacked my rate up really high to see if he could instigate the bad rhythm. And it threw me into AFib and I passed out. And so, I was okay and everything, and it finally converted over on its own, but I just felt horrible through Saturday. I felt really bad. And today I'm still having like weird heart things. So, get a cooling cloth. Yeah, it wasn't that I was hot. It was that it was a cool day. I was wearing a sweatshirt. It was just that my heart had gone wompy. And so the issue is, if you have Wolff Parkinson White and you don't have a history of AFib, then you can kind of watch it or take meds or whatever. If you have a history of AFib, you're at the highest risk for sudden death from Wolff Parkinson White. So that's why we have to fix it. So when I saw him Friday, he said, okay, well, we got to fix it. And, because you don't want to suddenly die, which I agree. And he said, it's going to be a risky and complex procedure, which is just the last thing you want to hear from your cardiophysiologist, right? You want to hear him say, oh, this is nothing. We'll go in, we'll do the little heart cath, we'll get in there, we'll burn that little node, we'll be in and out in 40 minutes. That's what you want to hear. But that's not what I got to hear. I got to hear it's going to be risky and complex, 2 to 4 hours. You won't be able to go home after. You have to stay in the hospital. I don't know for how long yet. And so we're going to do that June 29th on our wedding anniversary. No, July 29th on our wedding anniversary. But I feel like that's a good omen that we're doing it on our wedding anniversary. So there's all of that. So that's what's going on with my heart. They were going to schedule it much quicker, but I just insisted we had to wait until after my daughter's baby is born, and the baby's due July 22nd. And so I'll have to be back by the 29th. I had planned to stay longer, but we're just not going to be able to do that. So at least we'll get the July camping trip in, and we'll get the trip to be with my daughter when the baby's born and help out after, because she's going to have a C-section. And then as soon as when I leave there, I'll come back here, go right into the hospital and have that done. So I will keep you posted on that. That was because you were saying it's hot in there. Oh, yeah. Cooling cloths. Yeah, I've seen those. I have the air conditioner on. I usually keep another little fan in here, but I moved it into the living room the other day because it got hot in there. So anyway, all of that, I'm fine. Just keep me in your prayers, because I just have that kind of, if you know. So I have a mast cell disorder, which means you have all these weird things that go on with your body. And I think a lot of people, this is kind of the medical thinking right now, that a lot of people that have multiple diagnoses, like they have fibromyalgia and IBS and POTS syndrome and all of that, the new data is showing that what a lot of these people have are not those three things. They have one thing that is causing symptoms in multi-organ systems in the body, and it's mast cell activation. And if you can stabilize their mast cell, then all of those other things in the other systems get better. Their IBS clears up, their POTS syndrome clears up, their fibromyalgia gets better, because fibromyalgia is not really a thing. It's a name for a series of symptoms, but they're like, oh, it's overactive nerves. Okay, well, why are the nerves overactive? Well, we think because of mast cell activation. Chronic pancreatitis. We know that mast cells are heavy in the pancreas. So if you have chronic pancreatitis, it might be helpful to stabilize mast cells to see if you can stabilize those symptoms. So anyway, when you've got something like this, you kind of get used to, if you're going to have something, it's going to be weird. It's going to be hard to diagnose. You're going to get wrong diagnosis, and you're going to be plagued with multiple weird things throughout your life. And I've just come to accept that that's my course in life, and I try to make the best of it. So I try to learn as much as I can so I can share with other people and help them get answers. And so that makes it all feel more meaningful to me. And that's just how I handle that sort of thing. And I'm generally a person who, it doesn't matter how bad it gets, I'm still going to be joyful and cheerful and upbeat. So to give you an example, when I would wake up in the hospital off the ventilator after almost dying from a mast cell attack and being in a coma for 5 days, I was cheerful and polite and kind and thanking the nurses. And because I just feel like, if I can make that little bit of a difference, then, at least I'm improving someone else's life through that situation, which in turn makes me feel better. So, there are some selfish reasons for it. But yeah, I get probably 1 or 2 emails a week with somebody who is suffering from something that makes absolutely no sense. And we're usually able to get, if you talk to somebody long enough, which is I wish doctors would do more of, if you talk to somebody long enough, you can generally get to the bottom of 90% of the things. Rather than somebody come in and say, I don't have any zest for life and I just feel tired all the time. And they throw you on an antidepressant and you're out in 15 minutes. See, I couldn't do that. I would be like, okay, well, let's get some baseline labs, check your vitamin D, your B12, your iron. Let's see what your iodine level is. Let's check your thyroid, and let's do a basic chemistry profile on your hormones and make sure they're not all out of whack. Before I ever would give anybody a medicine, I would do those basic things because you're supposed to try and find the physiological cause before you start treating symptoms. Because it's kind of like throwing parts at a car. You can't figure out what's wrong with the car, so you just start replacing parts, hoping you get the right thing. Well, that's how medicine is these days. And so I feel like it makes a lot of sense to take the time and have prolonged conversations with people who are struggling with something that's not obvious or even seems obvious. Because what you get otherwise is treatment-based care or symptom-based care. So you've got a symptom. In their mind, they're drawing a line from that symptom to a particular drug, and that's the drug you leave with. And then pretty soon you're on 12 drugs. You're on drugs to treat the drugs that you're on because they're causing side effects. And you never really got to the bottom of thing one. And so I just think it makes a lot more sense to try to get to the bottom of thing one. Like, why is your thyroid malfunctioning? I guarantee you none of you have had a doctor order an iodine test, just a serum iodine to see if your iodine level is low. It's the number one cause of high thyroid, low thyroid, Graves' disease, all those things. Why would you not check for that one thing? And most doctors I know have never ordered an iodine level, don't even know how. And they just were taught in college that if you give iodine to somebody, you're going to mess up their thyroid. And that is based on a really bad study done a long time ago in which they did that, and it didn't even mess up the thyroids of the rats. So the whole thing is just a garbage study, but they conduct their whole practice with that knowledge. And so that's always just frustrating to me because I feel like you go in and you've just got a bunch of people who are managing symptoms with drugs, but not really getting to the bottom of, well, what's like, you're not depressed because you have a Paxil deficiency, right? I'm pretty sure you're not. You could be depressed because your gut biome is all off, and that's where you make like 80% of your neurotransmitters. So, let's do a stool test and see what your gut microbiome looks like. And if that's something that we can address, let's address it. Let's look at your diet and see if it's throwing off your gut. There's just a million things you can do before you start throwing antidepressants at people, at children even. You'll see a lot of kids start having behavioral problems after an infection, after they've been on an antibiotic. Well, because you've messed up their gut microbiome, and that's where most of their neurotransmitters are made. So your dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, all that stuff. And if you can get their gut back in line, you can fix the problem rather than just medicating symptoms. And so that's my high horse for today. I never know what it's going to be. It's always totally random. I don't know if you guys are going to watch the debate. I know they've been coming down on the YouTube folks, telling them they can't stream it, but apparently Rumble is going to allow the streaming. Now, that said, Rumble can allow the streaming and CNN could still come after you. So I'm not doing it. I don't have the money to fight CNN, and I don't want my little channel shut down because I love you guys. I doubt they'd come after my little channel, but you never know. They're kind of jerks that way. It's not the word I wanted to use. But if you're looking for a place to watch it, Crowder streams it. I like Crowder relatively. But he talks all through the debate, and you can't hear what was said. And I really do want to hear what was said. Stixenhammer, I think that's how you say his name, STYX. If you just search that, you'll find him. He's going to stream it. He uses GD a lot, so if that offends you, you probably don't want to watch him. Timcast is going to stream it. I've never watched one of Tim's debate streams, so I don't know what their style is with that, if it's just Tim or if it's his whole crew. Benny Johnson is streaming it. Chicks on the Right are streaming it, and I don't know what their style is either. I don't know if they interrupt a bunch, or I've not seen them stream a debate. That's all that I know of. If you guys know of any other channels that are streaming, shoot me an email and I'll keep people posted. Well, I won't be able to keep people posted now because I'm not on again till Friday. But we will definitely be talking about it. They're doing the pre-spin already. The pre-spin has just been exhausting. And I think probably I don't think a lot of people are going to watch it. I think it'll be poorly attended. I think it's going to be really flat because they won't have an audience, and an audience always, quite frankly, thank you, Gypsy Princess. That was the other one. I actually might watch his stream. But anything that you do in front of a physical audience has more energy because you have the energy of that audience. It translates over. People can sense it. And so, like when I do a talk on my near-death experience, I hate doing the Zoom ones. I just hate it. I would much rather go someplace, and I think I'm actually going to start insisting on that if people want to book me to do a talk for a group, that they're going to have to bring me out, because it impacts the talk itself, because that energy back and forth is palpable. And it's just the way I prefer to do it. I prefer to be able to talk to people after and get to know them a little bit and, kind of pour into them, because a lot of the people that go to those sorts of talks aren't people who have had NDEs. They're people who've lost someone and they're really struggling, and that's why they're interested in near-death experiences. But anyway, that's the clan that I know of that's going to post it. I'm sure there's probably more there. I would think maybe Charlie Kirk is probably going to stream it. And I like Charlie Kirk and I like his coverage. I don't know if Jack Posobiec will do it, but I would bet it wouldn't surprise me to see Charlie Kirk cover it and have Jack Posobiec in-house to do the analysis with him. But we'll see. If you're not going to watch it, then you don't care about any of this, and we'll get on to the book, which is probably why you came here to begin with. All right, let me see if I can find that mic is just right. Oh, that's better. Now I can see. I could see. There it is. So I pre-read this chapter a little bit to get a feel for how it was compared to the other chapter, and it's written totally different. It's really interesting, so I think you guys are going to like it. I like the last one too. It just was a little descriptive for me. All right. Leander Fraley. New Calypso was getting to be a real town when Bald Pate Fraley settled there. It wasn't tucked away so far in a corner of Nebraska that you couldn't find it on a map if you looked hard enough. On a big map, it bumped out with a fair quota of low buildings and square corner roads on each side of the railroad, and twice a week a freight train stopped, and when the station agent sold a ticket, he could set the signals, and one of the two-a-day, one each way passenger trains would squeal to a halt instead of chugging straight through. The local farmers shipped their in-harvest season, and the local cattlemen too, and supplies came in from the whole surrounding countryside. Yes, New Calypso had grown to town size when Baldpate Fraley stepped off the train with the tools of his trade in a black leather valise and set up shop in a squat two-room shack between a saloon and a sprawling feed store. Let me make sure I took comments down. I did. Baldpate was a barber. Maybe it was peculiar for a man without a hair on his head, on his own long thin head, to make a living out of other men's head crops. But he was a fair to middling barber who could trim your hair without nicking your ears and scrape away your stubble, leaving most of the skin intact. His shop was on the wrong side of the tracks. Well, wrong side to some people. It was on the side with most of the saloons and the stockyard and the warehouse and the basket mill and the in and out squatters' shacks. It wasn't on the side with the saloon that had upstairs rooms to rent and called itself a hotel, and the prosperous livery stable, and the good retail stores, and the solid, respectable houses of the solid, respectable townsfolk. That side already had a barber shop that had already caught the fancy trade with its neatly painted pole out front, and its big mirror behind the two chairs, and its shiny brass spittoon that its proprietor called a cuspidor. Baldpate started with a makeshift chair that he could raise and lower with a wooden lever. He finally acquired a real barber chair second-hand out of Lincoln. He finally acquired a small mirror and a black painted spittoon. But he couldn't compete with the other shop, and he didn't try. He got the fringe trade, the men who worked on the same side of the tracks, and an occasional cowboy nursing his nickels, and train men stopping off, and the squatters who sometimes could pay and sometimes couldn't. He had to be content with what he was. He didn't ask for much out of life. Good morning to you. I'm never going to be able to pronounce that name, but good morning. When Baldpate stepped off the train, he wasn't alone. He had two boys with him, his sons Leander and Greenberry. Leander was the older, already stretching long and thin in body and head with such a meager, scraggly topknot of hair, you could tell he wouldn't be wearing a man's pants long before he'd be bald as a bean. He took after his father. Greenberry was a pair of years younger, considerably shorter, but plumper, with a waving tangle of hair that would have made a fine big floor mop. He must have taken after his mother, who had quietly checked out of the Fraley family and the whole of this world some years before. The three of them lived in the back room of the shop. Baldpate did the barbering, and Leander did the housekeeping, and Greenberry did nothing. Nothing except eat hearty, wander around town with other boys, and sit lazy in the sun, which was what he liked best after the eating. Old Baldpate favored Greenberry, maybe because of that mop of hair, and was always telling Leander to take care of him and watch out for him. So naturally, it was Leander, not Greenberry, who began to be snapping the shears at the chair in the afternoons when Baldpate grew tired and felt the arthritis creeping into his joints. And then, one night, along about the time the boys had their full growth, Baldpate sat up on his cot in the dark and called across the room, "Leander, you mind me now. You take care of your brother." And old Baldpate lay back down and rolled his head on the pillow and died. You can forget about Baldpate Fraley now. He's not important to this story. He brought the family to New Calypso and started the family business and told Leander what to do and died, and that's enough said about him. It's Leander and Greenberry we're interested in. Leander first. He was a good boy, quiet and steady, so naturally he became a good man, quiet and steady still. The only thing unusual about his growing stage was the stretch he spent a lot of time drawing pictures with a thick surveyor's pencil he found somewhere on any scrap of paper that came to hand. Nobody paid any attention to that. Nobody except Greenberry, who just looked and laughed and settled back to more lazing in the sun. But anyone who paid real attention might have noticed that Leander liked to draw heads, men's heads, with plenty of hair on them and sideburns and all kinds of mustaches and beards. Then he didn't have time for that because he was helping with the barbering as well as doing the housekeeping, and then his father was dead and he had full-time barbering to keep him busy. He didn't need to draw heads after that. He had real ones to work with. It wasn't long before folks on the wrong side of the tracks knew they had a prize barber there who wouldn't be worrisome about being paid on the dot as long as they brought him heavy manes of hair or thick crops of whiskers to be sheared. They gave him plenty of practice, and by the time he had his techniques worked out, it was a treat to be barbered by that Leander. He'd set you in that one chair and stand back and circle you slowly, studying your head from all around. Then he'd pick up the right tool and go to work. Sometimes it'd be the hand clippers. He could do a whole handsome haircut with those clippers alone. Sometimes it'd be the heavy shears or, again, the light scissors or an alternating of them. Whatever it was, there'd be a wonderful snipping rhythm soothing about your ears. Leander had more than rhythm. He had positive melodies matching the work in hand. If your hair was coarse and strong, you'd hear a marching tune from the flying blades as the locks fell. If your hair was light and fluffy, you'd hear something like a delicate dance tune. His combing was right in time, and his soft old brush with the powder on it would be dusting dainty about your neck at the exact second the cut tag ends of hair might be beginning to get itchy and threatening to slide down under your shirt. And when he'd lower the chair back and lather your face and take the right razor out of old Baldpate's box that had one marked for each day of the week, then you knew you were in the hands of a master. His razors were always so sharp, the toughest whiskers surrendered without a struggle. His strokes were so deft you weren't certain you felt them. When he raised the chair back again and stepped away and circled you again, you sat still and waited for the verdict. Maybe he'd shake his head and snatch up his scissors and make a fresh attack on your hair or mustache or beard or even eyebrows, and by that time, you'd not even think of interfering because you knew that when he was finished, you'd look better than you ever did before. Let him do it his way, and Leander could make anybody look like somebody. As good as his barbering, some people said, was the effect he had on his customers. He wasn't a talking barber, and that marked him as different right away. He was usually so intent on the portrait he was making out of the raw materials of features and hair and whiskers in his chair that he might not even hear you if you spoke to him. But if you listened closely, you might hear him muttering to himself. Not much and not often. Just a few words now and then. Interesting head to work on. Now, these are eyebrows. No sense hiding that chin. Things like that. No matter how low and picayune, I don't know what that word is, you felt going into the shop, you had the feeling coming out that maybe the face you presented to the world had a point or two in its favor. The first the folks on the right side of the tracks began to have some notion what had been developing over on the other side was when Osgood R. Buxton, proprietor of the Big Bargain Mercantile Establishment and president of the New Calypso Bank, was stranded there with a half hour to kill. The day had started bad for him. All through breakfast, his wife had complained again about the wide, drooping mustache that had taken him years to cultivate into the kind of upper lip canopy he thought impressive. "Makes you look like a seasick mastiff," she said, and was so delighted at her comparison that he stomped out madder than usual. Then he went down to the freight office to check the shipment he was expecting and found it wasn't in and the train would be half an hour late. He stomped up and down the dirt street, kicking at the dust, and the unfairness of it all hit him so hard, he decided to strike back in some drastic way. Through the open door of Leander's shop, he saw the barber chair empty and stomped in and planked himself in it. He took hold of his mustache with both hands. "Shave this thing off," he said. Leander didn't pay any attention to the words. Leander was padding around him in a circle, studying his head from all sides. Buxton slapped both hands on the chair arms. "You hear me?" he shouted. "I said shave this cookie duster off me." Leander focused on him as someone speaking. No, Leander said. "It belongs there." Buxton subsided with a blowing gurgle that waggled the mustache. "Belongs there?" "Yes," Leander said. "It just needs a little pointing so it won't fight with your forehead." "Fight with my forehead," Buxton said in a small voice. He relaxed in the chair, and a big piece of checkered cloth covered him up to the neck and was tied behind, and clipping rhythm began about his head, and something like a cheery marching tune tickled his ears. When the cloth came off, he stood up and peered into the little mirror. His hair had been thinned along the sides, so suddenly it seemed thicker on top. His eyebrows had acquired a faintly quizzical air. His mustache was almost the same, yet remarkably different. It had a slight upward twist, suggestive of jauntiness without being aggressive, and the side tips somehow pointed your glance upward to notice the broad forehead. The whole effect was that of a man who could do things in the world and was of consequence in his community. When he walked out the door, Buxton was snapping his knees in long strides, and though the train was another half-hour late, he spent the time chatting cheerfully with the station agent and trying to catch the light right so he could see his reflection in a window. Cookie duster, I know, isn't that great? He's just a wordsmith for sure. With a beginning like that, and a booster like Buxton, only a few months were needed for Leander to have a steady clientele from the right side of the tracks. There were those who remained faithful to the other shop, and that was sensible because even Leander couldn't have kept the entire masculine quotient of new Calypso in trim. But he had all the trade he could handle. Fancy and fringe, and it was all the same to him. A customer was a customer, regardless of where he lived or how full or empty his pocket. Leander would do as artistic a job on a stray tramp as on Osgood R. Buxton himself. He stayed right on in the same one-chair shop and made only the one change of buying a bigger mirror. New Calypso became real proud of him, and Gus Hagelin, who ran the New Calypso Herald Gazette, ran items about his shop once in a while and kept notes on some of the stories about him to be included someday in a history of the township. You've probably never heard the one about the haircutting contest with Polka Dot City's best entry. New Calypsons rarely talked about that one. Some of them got to blowing boastful over Polka Dot City way about Leander's speed with the shears, which was silly because speed with Leander was just a part of his skill and not a purpose in itself. But anyway, that started an argument, and the upshot was that the new Calypsons bet that Leander could trim down 2 shaggy heads before the best barber Polka Dot City could find could finish one. The bets were heavy before Leander heard about it. He didn't like it, but he couldn't let any of his regulars lose money on him by default, so he said he'd make the race. They thought he ought to go into training, practice finger exercises and things like that, but he just said to tell him when and went on with his regular barbering. When they came for him on the day, he just picked up his clippers and a comb and dropped them in a pocket and went along. They had 3 men lined up on kitchen chairs, and those were really shaggy-headed. The other barber had a tray ready with half a dozen pairs of scissors laid out. Leander shrugged his shoulders and took out his own old clippers and waited. At the start-off gun, the 2 of them went at it, and it was Leander's race all the way. While the other barber clacked his shears and tangled himself in the hair and nipped his own fingers in his hurry, Leander skimmed along, swift and sure, and a fine, racing, fast jig-time tune played around the 2 heads he was working on, first one and then the other. There wasn't any waste motion. Each cut was exact and true. He was carving out neat haircuts with his clippers like a sculptor chipping a statue. He was going strong and about finished when the inevitable happened. He started muttering to himself. He had the two heads trimmed in a way that would have made any ordinary barber proud, when he stepped back and made a circuit of his two men and shook his head. He didn't even hear the shoutings of his supporters, and he stepped close again and started the final little delicate polishing strokes that would bring out the best barbered points of those two men. While the new Calypsons groaned, the other barber made a last jagged slice and claimed a finish, and considerable argument developed, but the judges gave him the decision. And Leander wasn't even aware of the argument. He was quietly patting around his two subjects and nodding satisfied to himself. The new Calypsons paid their bets, grumbling, and in time most of them conceded that Leander couldn't have done anything else and still been Leander, but they never talked much about that contest. They preferred telling the stories like the one about the time the governor was worried over re-election, and as a campaign stunt came all the way to New Calypso for some of Leander's barbering, and Leander touched him up so noble and convincing that he won with a thumping majority. But you've heard that one. Everybody has. It's Greenberry's turn now. Just as Leander kept on the way he had started, growing longer and thinner and balder and more energetic, so Greenberry kept on the way he had started too, growing plumper so that he seemed shorter and thicker-haired and lazier. He sprouted whiskers at a remarkably early age, and they weren't sparse and blonde like Leander's, which had to be shaved off because they were such poor specimens. No. Greenberry's whiskers were stout and dark and close sprouting, and he showed prodigious power in producing them. By time he was old enough to vote, if he'd ever bother to do anything taking that much energy, he had the biggest, bushiest beard in New Calypso, and it kept right on growing. No razor, not even a pair of scissors, had ever touched the main body of it. The only clipping he gave it was a mere minor pruning around the mouth to keep the way clear for his frequent intake of food. It roamed around his face from ear to ear and down over his chest like a magnificent stand of underbrush and merged above into his dark waving hair crop so that his upper cheeks and eyes and forehead peeped out like someone hiding in a thicket. Maybe he clung to that wondrous beard because he realized it represented his one real accomplishment. Some backbiting folks said he did it because he was mean and worthless and was trying to shame his brother, and in a figurative sense thumb his nose at the very family business that enabled him to stay so plump and well-fed. That couldn't have been true. Greenberry Fraley wasn't mean. Maybe close to worthless, but not mean. He was just lazy. He was just trifling. Matter of fact, he was as proud of Leander as anyone in New Calypso, and if arguing hadn't been too much trouble, he'd have been ready to argue with anyone that Leander was the best brother and the best barber in the county. All the same, it was peculiar to see the most amazing crop of hair and whiskers anywhere in civilized captivity sitting day after day in the sun on the little porch of a barber shop. That was what Greenberry did every day. The sun shone. Nobody ever knew whether he would have tried to do any barbering if the shop had had another chair. Probably not, because Leander hinted about getting another one once, and Greenberry promptly pointed out there wasn't room enough. So Greenberry took over the chore of meals, which was somewhat to his liking, and after breakfast he'd settle on the porch till time for his mid-morning snack, and then settle again till time for lunch, and after that, settle again till time for his mid-afternoon jaunt all the way next door to the neighborhood saloon. Just before this last, he'd go into the shop and around Leander by the chair and pull open the money drawer under the scissor shelf and slip into his pocket $1, never any more and never any less. When that dollar was in the hands of the bartender, he would come back for the evening meal. If his taste had been for the good liquor at a quarter a shot, he'd still be able to navigate among the dishes and play a fair game of backgammon with Leander after supper. If it had been for the cheap liquor, at 10 cents a shot, he'd likely soon be snoring on his cot, and Leander would have to be the cook. Those times Leander might begin to worry he wasn't doing right by his brother, and shake him awake, and try telling him he ought to get a job of some kind, and Greenberry would simply say, "Why? We're doing all right, aren't we?" And Leander wouldn't know what to say, because they were. There they were, Leander doing his barber's magic inside the shop, and Greenberry raising whiskers on the porch, and they might have continued that way indefinitely, if Leander hadn't acquired an obsession that started as a small notion and grew until it was so bad it could quiver in his fingertips. He had all his regular patrons in the new Calypso territory well in hand, each fitted with the hairstyles and whiskery facial adornments, or lack of same, that would make the emphatic most of their natural endowments. The task now was simply to keep them trimmed that way. There was no challenge left in them, no demand for fresh, creative effort. He welcomed stray strangers who wandered in with positive delight, but they were few and long between. He began to feel frustrated and barren of inspiration. And then he stood on the little porch one afternoon and looked at Greenberry snoozing in the sun, and a breeze waggled the long, soft ends of Greenberry's beard, and the small notion was born. By evening, it was so big in him that he could hardly look at Greenberry across the supper table. During the next days, it swelled to such proportions that it interfered with his barbering. He had to shake his head sharp to rid it of the image of that magnificent shock of raw material, and the rhythmic melody of his cutting would break as his fingers quivered on the clippers. And then Greenberry, all unknowing, tripped the trigger of the trap awaiting him by taking on 10 shots and coming home and falling asleep. Leander closed the shop door at 5 o'clock as usual and padded into the back room and saw Greenberry gently snoring, and a sudden little tremor ran through him. He rocked on his feet a moment and closed his mouth with a sudden snap. He padded into the shop and returned and laid out his tools on a chair by the cot, the clippers and the scissors, big and small, and a comb, and the right razor and the brush and the soap mug. Carefully, he raised Greenberry's shoulders with one arm and slipped 2 pillows behind them. Carefully, he spread the checkered cloth over Greenberry's plump middle and raised Greenberry's beard to slide the upper edge of the cloth under it. For a long time he stood staring at the huge thatch of wondrous hair and whiskers framed against the cloth and the top pillow. He was not studying the head, because he did not need to. He knew every possible configuration hidden inside that thicket, every feature that everyone else in New Calypso had long forgotten. He was tasting the sweet, tangy ecstasy of anticipation. At last, he carefully set another chair by the cot side and sat down on it and leaned forward. With a soft sigh of complete contentment, he picked up the clippers and went to work. Greenberry stirred once at a slight tugging on his chin, but a rich, majestic melody of snipping blades was playing about his head, and it soothed him even deeper into slumber. He woke late in the evening in the lamplight and was surprised that Leander had not roused him to supper. He was more surprised when he saw Leander limp on the other cot, asleep, and on his long, thin, bald-topped face the beatific smile of a man who has made a supreme effort and found it good. Greenberry heaved to his feet and was so befuddled he was not aware that he was a changed man. Out of sheer habit, he ate 5 big sandwiches and did not notice the new freedom of access to his mouth, and lay down again and slept once more. He was still unaware in the morning, despite the secretive, proud glances Leander gave him, and awareness did not touch him until he went out the back door and took hold of the 2-wheeled push cart there and started off on his weekly food shopping jaunt to Oscar Tritipoi's General Grocery Store. We're going to go with that. He never reached the store, not on that trip. He was accustomed to being ignored by most people passing, and that pleased him because it saved the energy of a return greeting. He was accustomed to having those who did speak make humorous references to his beard. But this time, neither thing happened. Everyone noticed him, very definitely. They stared at him as if they had never seen him before, and he turned to watch him go by. And no one spoke about his beard. No one spoke at all. Most of them nodded to him, respectful and deferential, and some of the men involuntarily tipped their hats. It was too much for Greenberry's somnolent mind to grasp all at once. He hurried back to the shop, went in, and turned to Leander, puttering at his instrument shelf, and in the turning saw himself in the big mirror. Not himself, someone else. A man of amazingly impressive presence. A thick shock of hair tamed and disciplined to dignity, yet with the inherent vitality plain in every faultless wave. Strong eyebrows subtly arched to emphasize the width and nobility of the brow. A sturdy mustache, firm and short-cropped, speaking of confidence and self-assurance in itself, and somehow also pointing out the outthrust power of the nose above. Rugged sideburns clipped close, yet with a faint flaring that suggested breadth of mind. And a beard deep under the chin and reliable, short, but not too short, wide, but not too wide, a solid foundation for the face proclaiming serenity and wisdom with every sturdy hair. Greenberry shook with the shock. He threw Leander one look of frenzied reproach and fairly ran into the back room and closed the door. He sat on the edge of his cot and leaned the superb portrait that was now his head forward into his plump hands and let the frightening knowledge that he was marked with distinction sweep over him. It was characteristic that he never once thought that a few strokes with scissors could reduce him again to a straggly nunnity. He would have had to make those scissor strokes. He sat motionless a long time. At last, his head rose and he made a few exploratory motions with his hands around his chin and cheeks. He stood up and placed himself in front of the little mirror that had once served in the shop, and his mind was braced now for what he would see. He studied himself, turning his head sideways and rolling his eyes to catch the splendor from various angles. Unconsciously, he stood straighter and pulled in his bulging waistline and puffed out his chest. By noontime, the new Greenberry Fraley, fortified with a full lunch, was ready to face the world. The new Greenberry Fraley. That is precisely what he was. A new man. A changed man. In all outward semblance, at least. The very first day he discovered what his impressive appearance could accomplish in promoting prompt, actually a scurrying service, and the choicest cuts of meat from the formerly lackadaisical and almost contemptuous Oscar Tritipoi. On the third day, he learned the ease with which he could obtain virtually unlimited credit at the big bargain mercantile establishment, and forthwith arrayed himself in what was to be thereafter his unvarying uniform: black trousers and black frock coat, and gorgeous gray vest, and white shirt and celluloid collar, and black string bow tie, unseen beneath that new disciplined, matchless beard, except when he thrust his chin outward and fluffed the beard up in a gesture calculated to draw attention to its perfect proportions. By the end of the first week, he had even acquired a gold-headed cane, and his voice had dropped several notes to a deepening resonance, and he was developing a flowing, almost courtly manner. By the end of the second week, he was settled in his new role, rapidly becoming another new Calypsan institution, a monumental figure seen every clear day on the center bench between the town watering trough and the town flagpole across from the post office. You can assay the true measure of Leander's art when you understand that already the new Calypsans were forgetting the old Greenberry, who sat in his ancient red plaid shirt and split-seam dungarees on the porch of the little shop, and were drifting so completely under the spell of the new Greenberry that they accepted his benign nods as benedictions, and felt that their town was a better place because such a towering testament to the dignity and nobility of the human race dwelt among them. When he had snoozed on the shop porch, he had been a shiftless disgrace to be ignored. Now, when he drowsed on the bench, serene and nodding in the sun, he was a philosopher, thinking deep thoughts and pondering grave problems and giving tone to the community. Why, it's a fact there was not even a noticeable chuckle when he began calling himself J. Greenberry Fraley. It was Osgood R. Buxton himself who launched Greenberry on his public career. The time came when Buxton was a mite worried about the new Calypso Bank. More than a mite worried. The bank had overreached itself in granting loans, and the cattle market was wobbly, and a lot of the loans might have to be carried over, and a few rumors got to skipping about, and Buxton was worried what would happen if a run started. Sup, savages. Hi, guys. Hi, Jacob. Now you got me all mixed up here. He sat at his desk by the bank's front window, worrying and stroking the mustache Leander had saved for him, and out the window he noticed, with a sudden idea prompted, push the never-failing impressiveness of Greenberry on the bench. 5 minutes, and a brief talk later, Buxton was on his way to Gus Hagelin with an item for the Herald Gazette to the effect that J. Greenberry Fraley had kindly consented to become a director of the new Calypso Bank. The only immediate change for Greenberry was the addition of $10 a month to his pocket and a slight shift of sitting quarters from the bench by the flagpole to a bench in front of the bank where the sun was even better, and his presence was a steady reassurance to troubled depositors. The monthly meetings were no real chore. All he had to do was attend and sit quiet and murmur, in a thoughtful tone when an important decision was posed, and the other directors would proceed exactly as they would have done without him, buttressed now with the feeling that they were being wise and judicious indeed. But this first gesture into the realm of actual activity encouraged other people to draw him into other things. He discovered the lure of speech-making. The deep roll of his voice, combined with the overpowering benignity of his appearance, to produce hypnotic effect on his audiences. The words were unimportant. It was the impression that prevailed. He auctioned the box lunches at town dances and could obtain good prices for those prepared by the most unattractive, unattached females. He presided at the annual Strawberry Festival and the Stockman's Show, and was the 4th of July orator. There was no doubt about it. With little real effort on his part, he had become an unofficial public functionary. And Leander? Well, Leander was content. He had done what old Baldpate told him to do. He had taken care of Greenberry in the most important way, and what remained of the taking care was merely a matter of helping to maintain Greenberry in the style to which he had become accustomed. That was simple, because Greenberry was not active enough to wear out clothes rapidly, and ate, if anything, less than before, and his drinks were almost invariably supplied by admirers, more than willing to pay for the privilege. Leander now had constantly before him the inspiration of his finest masterpiece, the one perfect portrait that he never tired of retouching and keeping in perfect trim. And Greenberry, in his way, was properly grateful. His innocent trust that Leander would take care of him had been justified in a surprising and superlative degree. He never failed, when extolling the glories of New Calypso in his occasional orations, to include some mention of the tonsorial wizardry of that far-famed prince among barbers, my brother Leander. He continued to grace the little shop building with his presence as his eating and sleeping quarters. He continued to spend his spare evenings playing backgammon with Leander. So complete was his hold on the town that many people regarded this as somewhat of a condescension on his part. Yes, Leander had worked out a way of life for himself and Greenberry that satisfied them both, and was a double-weight asset to New Calypso. Then enter the serpent, Worthington P.C. Stimmel. That was the name in Old English lettering on his calling cards, and he carried his cards in a card case. They also stated, in smaller but no less compelling type, that he was president and corresponding secretary, the Amalgamated Association for the Betterment of American Communities. This Stimmel had long since made an interesting discovery. He had learned that when towns attained some size, they found themselves needing such modern improvements as sewers and cobblestone pavements and those ingenious means of public transportation, horse cars. He had discovered that sometimes the people of an ambitious small town could be persuaded that the process would work in reverse, that if they would sell bonds to themselves to raise the funds and draw plans for new streets and install sewers and pavements and horse cars, then their town would automatically attract newcomers and grow swiftly and become boomingly prosperous. It was unfortunate that the promotional expenses and the cost of this Stimmel's invaluable services always approximated most, if not all, of the funds raised. But by the time the townsfolk learned that in full eye-opening force, this Stimmel would be far away, planning the improvement of another community in another part of the country. A man of Worthington P.C. Stimmel's experienced discernment could see at once the splendid future that awaited New Calypso. He could recognize with equal facility the unusual opportunity offered by J. Greenberry Fraley's bewhiskered magnificence. He had not been in New Calypso 10 days before stationery was printed and bonds were being engraved, and both stationery and bonds proclaimed the fact that J. Greenberry Fraley was chairman of the New Calypso Progressive Citizens League, the latest chapter of the AABAC. There was some opposition, led by Oscar Tridipoe, who was by nature an obstinate individual, and Gus Hagelin, who had acquired from his newspaper work a suspicious trend of mind and some knowledge of human frailties. But obstinacy and suspicion could not prevail against the majesty of the Greenberry whiskers. The NCPC League gained momentum like an avalanche moving, and the date was set for the public meeting that would launch the bond sale. All this bothered Leander not at all. He never interfered in Greenberry's doings. His own doubts about the League project were overwhelmed by Greenberry's contagious optimism. To him, the thought of a bigger and more booming new Calypso was pleasant, because that might mean new and unfamiliar customers. He went quietly on with his barbering, and then Worthington P.C. Stimmel made a mistake. Operating on the principle of when in Rome doing what the Romans do, he went into the little shop for a hair trim. "Heard about you from my brother," this Stimmel said in his best patronizing manner. There was no reply. Leander was circling the chair, studying him from all sides. The first eager, small smile on Leander's face was fading into a tight-lipped frown. Mutton chop whiskers. Leander had never liked mutton chop whiskers and refused to permit them on any regular customers. They were not right for any decent human head. They could have only one purpose, to hide or draw attention away from something. Correct. These mutton chops gave a broadness and solidity to this head that was not really there. They obscured the whole sinister, greedy, calculating cast of the countenance. Leander picked up his big scissors, and they hovered above Stimmel's head, and the rhythmic tune they played in their first warming up skirmishes in the air was a stern and resolute one. But they never touched a hair or whisker. Leander stopped and laid them down. He could not do it. He picked up the small scissors, and for the first time since he was a boy, relieving old Baldpate in the afternoons, he gave an ordinary haircut, merely trimming into neatness and the original portrait presented to him. This was all that happened then in the shop. But afterward, Leander did what he had never done before. He closed the shop during working hours and went to see Gus Hagelin, and what he learned there added more worry to what he had learned in the shop. And he tried to talk to several league members, and they laughed and told him to stick to his, barbering. And he tried to talk to Greenberry that evening, and Greenberry laughed too, and at last grew huffy and said he'd move to a room at the hotel if Leander didn't stop harping on something he knew nothing about. So Leander kept his worry to himself, and it grew till it was a new obsession in him. And he kept remembering what old Baldpate had said, and realizing that Greenberry was in this slick Stimmel scheme, and in a sense, the kingpin of it, the asset that could push it through. And so at last, when he had worried himself thinner, and the time was short, he did something else he had never done before. On the day before the public meeting, he went to the saloon next door and bought a bottle of the cheap liquor, and had it on the table when he played backgammon with Greenberry that evening. He poured more into Greenberry's glass whenever that was empty, and his own slick scheme succeeded. By 11 o'clock, Greenberry was snoring soundly on his cot. Leander padded forward into the shop and returned and laid out his tools on a chair and spread the checkered cloth over Greenberry's chest. For a long time he stood staring down at the finest portrait he had ever achieved. With a soft sigh of torment, he picked up his clippers, and a slow, sad melody of snipping blades began to play around Greenberry's head. Greenberry slept straight through the night and well into the morning. He awoke slowly and then focused suddenly on the old clock on a shelf. 5 minutes past 10. The meeting had begun 5 minutes ago, and he was not there. No time even for breakfast, and that was a drastic thing to happen to him. He shrugged as quickly as he could into his frock coat and grabbed his gold-headed cane and hurried out through the shop, past Leander sitting mournful in his own barber chair. He hurried out the front door, disregarding Leander's calling to him, and hurried up the street and across the tracks into the crowded space behind the flagpole where a bandstand had been erected and the four-piece New Calypso band was seated and Worthington P.C. Stimmel was standing erect delivering his practiced spiel. There on the stand, this Stimmel, talking against time, saw with relief the magnificent wavy shock of Greenberry's hair moving toward him through the assembled people. He shifted smoothly into remarks, introducing that almost legendary repository of wisdom and civic foresight, that peerless pillar of New Calypsan community life, J. Greenberry Fraley, and waved to the approaching pillar to ascend the stand. And Greenberry burst out of the crowd and went up the steps and took his dignified stance and thrust his head forward a bit and reached up in the strange, hushed silence that had gripped the whole scene to fluff his beard. It was that gesture that released the first of the sniggering chuckles into loud and contagious guffaws. Greenberry's hand came up in the familiar movement to fluff his beard, and there was no beard for him to fluff. There was only what the New Calypsans had long ago forgotten, the ridiculous small and round little boyish dimpled chin that the beard had hidden. As the laughter rolled around the flagpole and New Calypsans thumped each other on the back, Worthington P.C. Stimmel, that man of experienced discernment, slipped down from the stand and away, and Gus Hagelin, that man aware of human frailties, leapt up on the stand and shouted at the band, and raucous music began to blare. And through the midst of the overall merriment came a long and thin and bald-headed figure, stoop-shouldered and sad and ashamed, to take care of his brother and lead him home. All the rest of the day the little shop was closed. The next day it was opened, and time had gone backward. A plump figure in a red plaid shirt and split-seam dungarees sat on the little porch in the sun. But inside, there were no mere snipping melodies. There was only the plain pedestrian plodding of routine cutting. Greenberry sat in the sun and some of the time actually snoozed, and Leander went on with his barbering inside. But it was an ordinary barber's barbering. He had used his art to destroy and not to create, and the magic was gone from his fingers. In mid-afternoon, Greenberry rose and went into the shop and pulled open the money drawer and took out $1 and reached and took another and looked at Leander patiently working his scissors in a dull routine and put the second $1 back and plodded out. It was a 10-shot session for him, and he returned barely able to navigate and lay down on his cot and in a few moments was sleeping, and almost anyone seeing him there would have said that that was all he was doing. But he was doing something else. All unaware, he was doing the one thing that he could do better than anyone else in New Calypso. Leander saw it when he came into the back room from the shop and started to prepare some supper. He saw what he, a barber, had actually forgotten. He saw the dark stubble emerging on Greenberry's chin and remembered Greenberry's prodigious talent for raising whiskers. His eyes brightened, and small rhythmic melodies began to stir again in his finger muscles. He had not failed old Baldpate. Not yet. He could try again, and if necessary again. It would not take long, not with Greenberry so obligingly concentrating, even in his sleep, on that wondrous accomplishment. Already Leander could begin to see the next portrait. Not dignity and thoughtfulness and deep wisdom this time. No. A portrait built around a short, stubby, square-cut beard, the beard of a man steady and dependable and competent at whatever work he might have in hand. That was good. I liked that. Who would have, what what kind of literary genius can take the the story of a barber and bring it to life like that? I mean, it was poetry. It was just beautifully written. I just, wow. Wow. I love that. If you got here late, go back and listen. It's so good. I mean, if I could just master a fraction of this guy's writing ability. I mean, Jack Schaefer, just wow. I mean, I know he's dead, but he can still hear us. That was just beautiful. It was just beautiful, beautiful writing. Gorgeous. You could have just lapped up every bit of it. He's such a prolific storyteller. And his ability to just take the words and not make it too much. You know what I mean? Not be so flourishing with it that it's tiring, but just enough that it just brings the story to light. I mean, you realize there was what, two sentences of dialogue in that whole chapter? That was it. And generally you want dialogue because you want to tell the story through dialogue and not tell the story through telling, because telling generally is boring and dialogue is more interesting. But this guy is a master at it. I mean, just wow. I just love it so much. I was trying to watch the old series Lonesome Dove last night, and I couldn't get into it because the writing is real flat for me. And, and then I open up this book today and read chapter 2, and it's just, I mean, you're just on a journey. You can see it all. I can see the chair. I can see the barber shop. I can see that old bench out front. I can see Greenberry sitting on it with his, you know, unkempt appearance, his red flannel shirt, his torn pants. You can just see it. It's just gorgeous. It is just beautiful, beautiful writing. And it brings life to itself and to the person reading it. The Bible's like that, for me. Debbie and I were talking about this the other day about how the verses that strike us in the Bible are life-giving, and there's just so few books that are like that. But I think Jack has written one here. This is just really a joy to read. Debbie says, a well-written classic fairy tale of the Western world. Yeah, what a great story, Gypsy Princess. And it's so funny because he didn't live in those times. What did they say there's something, let me find it, that he had never been like west of Chicago. I can't remember where it was. It's not Chicago. Hold on, Jack Schaefer. Let's do his wiki. Oh, hold on. Let me share this with you guys so you can go with me here. He enters the mysterious and sometimes funny psychology of the human mind. And he does it so beautifully. It's not like, Leander was thinking this. It's not like that. It's so artfully done. Hold on a second. I'm going to stop this screen share and share another screen. Gets this one. All right, let me get that to full screen so you guys can see it. Full screen, and then let's take me and make me little tiny in the corner because I want you to see this guy. There I am. All right. He's smooth. He is smooth. I would love to hear him talk. Like, I'd love to hear a talk that he's done and just hear his cadence and the timbre of his voice, all of that. I would love to hear that. Okay. Gotta go here. Okay. He was born November 19th, 1907, died in 1991. There's a part here where they talk about when he wrote Shane, Schaefer had never traveled farther west than Cleveland, Ohio. The Albuquerque Journal writer, excuse me, Ollie Reed Jr. wrote that Schaefer could turn out such a Western before he ever saw the West is a tribute to his dogged research, devotion to facts, and storytelling ability, all honed by his newspaper work. Yeah, he was mostly a newspaper guy before he started So following his departure from Columbia University, Schaefer went to work for the United Press. In his long career as a journalist, he worked as a reporter for the United Press news agency, as editorial page editor for the Virginia Pilot in Norfolk, Virginia, and the Baltimore Sun, and as editor of the New Haven Journal-Courier. In his career as a journalist, Schaefer wrote innumerable news stories, feature articles, and opinion columns, and thousands of book, film, play reviews, and editorials. In the 1930s, Schaefer worked as the education director of the Connecticut State Reformatory, and following his stint at the Norfolk, Virginia Pilot, from 1944 to 48, he worked in advertising and was a freelance writer before devoting himself to fiction. I would love to read a biography on this guy. In 1929, he graduated from Oberlin College with a major in English. From 29 to 30, he attended graduate school at Columbia, but left without completing his Master of Arts degree when the faculty there denied him permission to prepare a master's thesis on the development of motion pictures. Schaefer's education included multiple courses on Greek and Roman mythology, which is thought to have served him well in creating the archetypal heroes that populated his westerns. He read voraciously as a child. That's about it. But just wow. Just wow. He's so smooth. I'm really looking forward to the next chapter now. I've kind of committed to only reading a chapter each time because I think this will get us through the summer and up to our September book, which is going to be a much heavier read. And I can, quickly put together a video for you guys on the weeks that I'm going to be gone for the baby and for camping and the heart thing and camping again. Hopefully I'll be up to that by the end of August. So this is a good pick for us. And I'm liking the shorter story that it's this contained beautiful writing and then a neat ending, just coming all together. I was a little disappointed in the last chapter that the bear had to die, but if it's you or the bear, it's got to be you, right? I mean, I know there's probably a lot of lefties that would say, no, the bear should live, but they're not facing down a bear, so that's really easy to say. But anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. I'm going to close this out in prayer. I'm sure I'll run into some of you in some of the debate chats tomorrow night. And until then, I will see you guys on Friday. Thank you for continuing to pray for me with this heart procedure coming up on the 29th of July. If you got here late, I do appreciate your prayers. It means a lot to me. And prayers leading up to it, I'm a little nervous about this one. I don't know why. Usually I'm pretty cool about it. I didn't want to have the shoulder surgery when I had it. And that turned out to maybe not have been too far off. But this one's got me a little nervous. So we'll just pray on it. Like Debbie told me yesterday, God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. And thank God for that. That we don't have to walk around and worry and anxiety. I'm not walking around and worry and anxiety. There's just a little tinge in me of really not wanting to have this done. But it's a complex and risky procedure. So of course I've got a little tinge of nerves. But anyway, I'll pray us out and we will see you guys on Friday at 4:30 Eastern. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, and thank you for my friends who've come to enjoy the incredible, beautiful writings of Jack Schaefer, and just give him a hat tip from Nurse Penny here on planet Earth, as he's hanging out with you in heaven, I'm sure. And just such beautiful writing. It lifts the spirits, and boy, don't we need that in these days. And it's funny I say that a lot, Lord, but all the days have been hard. I think of the settings of Jack's books and the pioneer days. And I mean, you could die from a simple infection back then because there weren't meds to treat it. So while we think we're living in the worst times, we're certainly not living in the hardest times. And that's something that we ought to remember and be grateful for. Father, I thank you so much for everybody who supports the show in prayer. I thank you so much for everybody who supports the show financially. That means a lot and helps defer the cost for us, which is more significant, I think, than people realize. But thank you for the people who faithfully support the show. It means so much to me. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to help others through this platform that I never saw coming. Most of all, we thank you for your son, Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. I love you, whole big bunches. I will see you on Friday. If I don't see you, what is happening there? If I don't see you in the Chicks on the Right chat tomorrow and Friday morning, I'll see you Friday evening on the Nurse Penny podcast at 4:30 Eastern. I love you. Oh, and if you want to donate and support the show, in the description section, you'll find my PayPal, Venmo, and what's the other one? Cash Apps. And you can donate there, and we really appreciate it. So thank you guys. Love you, whole big bunches. I'll see you on Friday. Nurse Penny, out.